Tiude. My parents burned my diploma to force me to give my inheritance to their favorite daughter, but my grandparents had a surprising twist in store. Inside the box was a silver necklace antique, delicate, clearly precious. This belonged to my mother, Eleanor explained, fastening it around Jordan's neck. She gave it to me when I proved I could stand on my own. Now it's yours. Remember, Jordan, real worth isn't given, it's earned. This belongs to someone who earns her place. Robert pleaded guilty to simple assault and criminal mischief. His sentence: 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management counselling, and a no-contact order with Jordan as a condition of his probation. Megan, as a first-time offender who demonstrated cooperation and showed evidence of being manipulated by her mother, received deferred adjudication. If she completed her probation and restitution requirements, the charge would be dismissed. She accepted the deal without argument. None of them went to prison. Jordan hadn't wanted that. What she wanted was documentation, official records, proving that she wasn't crazy, that she hadn't imagined the injustice, that her family had committed crimes against her. Now she had that proof, signed, sealed, and filed permanently. Cliffhanger. I thought that was the end. Justice served, truth revealed, consequences delivered. But 3 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at my office sent through my workplace because its author didn't have my home address. And it forced me to confront a question I wasn't ready to answer. Part 5. Resolution. What remains? Objective. Provide satisfying closure without false reconciliation. Show consequences playing out over time. Demonstrate that peace is possible without forgiveness. End with emotional resonance for the target audience. A. 6 months later, Jordan's new life. Spring arrived in Philadelphia with unusual warmth. Jordan sat on her apartment balcony, the same apartment she'd rented before the inheritance, because she didn't need a larger space to prove her worth. Some things, she'd learned, were enough exactly as they were. 6 months had passed since the meeting at Mr. Harrison's office. 6 months of adjusting to a new reality, one where she no longer carried the weight of family dysfunction on her shoulders. She'd kept her job. The inheritance hadn't changed her identity. It had simply removed a burden she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. She invested responsibly, consulted with her grandparents on company decisions, and built a life that finally felt like her own. Every Sunday, she drove to Lancaster County for dinner. Richard taught her about the construction business. Eleanor shared family recipes and old photographs, the history Jordan had been systematically excluded from for 35 years. For the first time, she understood what family was supposed to feel like. She changed her phone number. Her parents didn't have the new one. B. The consequences unfold. The fallout from the revelation had been thorough and permanent. Robert had lost more than money. Without his title as company manager, without the house that had symbolized his status, without his daughter's fear to sustain his sense of power, he seemed diminished. Adrift. Jordan heard through her grandparents that he spent most days in the small apartment they'd rented, unable to accept what had happened. The anger management classes were mandatory, but whether they were working remained unclear. Diane had attempted to rally sympathy in their social circle, playing the victim of ungrateful children and cruel in-laws. But the evidence was public record now. The plea deal was a matter of court documentation. The friends who had once admired her perfect family slowly stopped returning calls. The carefully constructed image she'd maintained for decades crumbled one phone call at a time. Jordan treasured those words. But she also noticed that her grandparents' visits were rare. Phone calls were infrequent. When she asked why, her mother always had an explanation. They're busy. They have health issues. They prefer quiet. Jordan believed her. She had no reason not to. Misdirection Hasson planted. Audience assumes grandparents are somewhat distant, possibly uninvolved. Megan had taken a job at an insurance company administrative work. Entry level, the kind of position she would have considered beneath her a year ago. The trust conditions required 2 years of continuous employment. For the first time in her life, she had to wake up early, answer to a supervisor, and prove her worth through performance rather than existence. Jordan felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but she felt no guilt either. These were consequences, not revenge. They had been earned through decades of deliberate choices. C. The letter from Megan. The letter arrived at Jordan's office 3 weeks after the meeting, the only address Megan could find. Handwritten on plain paper, no envelope, no return address. Just words. Dear Jordan, I've tried to write this letter probably 20 times. Every version sounds like I'm making excuses, so I'm going to try something different. The truth. I knew what Mom was doing. Not everything I didn't know about the letters when we were kids, or the full extent of the money. But I knew enough. I knew you were treated differently. I knew the money from grandparents was supposed to be yours. I knew, and I said nothing, because saying something would have meant admitting I didn't deserve what I was getting. When Mom asked me to write that letter to Grandma and Grandpa, I told myself it wasn't that bad. You were already successful. You didn't need their money. I was helping the family. I was being a good daughter. I was lying to myself. I was choosing me over you, the way I'd been taught to do my entire life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned that, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd forgive me either. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what Mom did. I see what I did. And I see what I let happen by staying quiet. Mom keeps calling me. She wants to strategize about how to fix things, how to get the trust changed, how to turn Grandma and Grandpa against you. I stopped answering. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it means something to me. I'm working now, at an insurance company. It's boring and hard, and I hate getting up early. But it's mine. Nobody gave it to me. I'm doing it myself. I don't know how you did this alone for so long. I don't know if we can ever be sisters. But for the first time in my life, I'm trying to figure out who I am when nobody's handing me anything. It's terrifying. I'm sorry. Megan. Jordan read the letter 3 times. She folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, the same drawer where she kept her grandmother's diary entries and her recovered childhood letters. She didn't respond. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. But she didn't throw it away either. D. Dinner with grandparents. Understanding. The following Sunday, Jordan arrived at the farmhouse wearing her great-grandmother's silver necklace. Eleanor noticed immediately and smiled. "It suits you," she said. It always did. After dinner, they sat in the living room, the same room where Jordan had learned the truth 6 months ago. Outside the window, the garden was beginning to bloom. Richard had started teaching Jordan about the construction business, and she'd proven an apt student. Competence, it turned out, ran in the family, just not through her parents. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan said. "Anything, sweetheart." What Jordan didn't know, when she was 12, Eleanor had confronted Diane about the obvious favoritism. Diane's response had been nuclear 2 years of complete estrangement, with threats of permanent separation from the grandchildren. Eleanor learned that direct confrontation only gave Diane ammunition. So she retreated, documented, and waited. "How did you know, all those years ago, when I was just a kid, how did you know I was worth believing in?" Richard considered the question carefully, the way he considered everything. "We didn't know you'd succeed," he said finally. "No one can know that about another person. But we saw how hard you tried when no one was watching. How you kept writing letters even when we rarely responded because you didn't know we weren't receiving them. How you worked through college without complaining, without giving up, without letting bitterness destroy you. That's character," Eleanor added. "It's not about being perfect or successful. It's about continuing to try when trying doesn't seem to matter. We saw that in you from the beginning. And we knew that kind of character deserves to be protected, even if we had to wait decades to protect it properly." Jordan felt tears she didn't try to hide. "I spent so long thinking something was wrong with me, that I wasn't enough for them." "There was never anything wrong with you," Eleanor said firmly. "The flaw was in them, in their inability to see what was right in front of them. You just had the misfortune to be born to people who couldn't recognize your worth. That's their tragedy, Jordan. Not yours." E. Final reflection, peace without forgiveness. Later that evening, Jordan drove home through countryside she'd known her whole life. She passed the intersection near her old high school, the place where she'd stood at 18, leaving for Penn State with nothing but a partial scholarship and determination. She pulled over, got out of the car, stood in the same spot. At 18, she'd been terrified, alone, convinced that she was leaving because she wasn't wanted, not because she deserved something better. She'd driven away that day believing that if she just worked hard enough, if she just proved herself enough, her family would finally see her. Now, at 35, she understood the truth. She could never have worked hard enough. She could never have proved enough, because the problem was never her performance. The problem was that her mother had decided, before Jordan could walk or talk, that she would never be loved. That wasn't Jordan's fault. It had never been Jordan's fault. Her parents would never apologize, would never change, would never see her as anything but the inconvenience that derailed their lives. She had accepted this not as tragedy, but as fact, like weather, like gravity, something that simply was. Megan might change, might not. Jordan had decided to leave that door unlocked but unattended. If Megan chose to walk through it someday, Jordan would listen. If she didn't, Jordan would survive. She'd been surviving without a real family for 35 years. She'd built her own. And that family, Richard, Eleanor, and the person she'd become, was enough. F closing. Jordan got back in her car. The evening air was cool. The sky was beginning to streak with sunset colours. She thought about everything she'd lost. A mother who should have loved her, a father who should have protected her, a sister who should have been her friend, a childhood that should have been safe. She thought about everything she'd gained, grandparents who fought for her, a career she'd built herself, truth finally spoken, justice finally delivered, peace finally earned. C. The money that vanished, foreshadowing the theft plus set up for confrontation. College acceptance letters arrived Jordan's senior year. Penn State offered a partial scholarship, but she still needed $15,000 annually. When she asked her parents for help, her father didn't look up from the television. "You're smart, figure it out." She thought about Megan's letter, sitting in her desk drawer. About the possibility that some relationships could be rebuilt if both people were willing to do the work. About the equal possibility that some damage was permanent. She didn't know which outcome awaited, and for the first time, that uncertainty didn't frighten her. Because she finally knew who she was, not the mistake her mother resented, not the reminder her father couldn't face, not the obstacle her sister had to overcome. She was Jordan Francis, a woman who had built herself from nothing, a granddaughter who had earned her place, a person whose worth had never depended on whether her parents could see it. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with silence, the kind of silence that used to feel like rejection, but now felt like freedom. The road stretched ahead, dark and open. Jordan drove toward home. Final line, not every wound heals completely, but some wounds teach you how to be stronger than the thing that hurt you. I was born to a family that couldn't love me. I built a family that could. That's not a tragedy, that's a triumph. And it took me 35 years to understand the difference. Jordan figured it out. 2 jobs, overnight shifts at a 2-4-hour diner, weekend tutoring sessions, 4 years of exhaustion that somehow coexisted with Dean's List grades. She graduated with honours and a bone-deep understanding that she could rely on no one but herself. Meanwhile, Megan attended a private liberal arts college. Full tuition, furnished apartment, new car for her 20th birthday. During a rare phone call with her grandmother, Eleanor mentioned something that didn't make sense. "I hope the money we've been sending has helped with your expenses." Jordan paused. "What money, Grandma?" "We've sent $5,000 every year through your parents. For your education. Your mother said you were too proud to accept it directly, so we gave it to them to pass along." Jordan's stomach dropped. $20,000, 4 years of overnight shifts and constant exhaustion, and her grandparents thought they'd been helping. Yes, Jordan heard herself say. "Thank you." She hung up and confronted her mother that evening. Diane's response was smooth, practiced. "Your grandmother is getting confused, Jordan. She's almost 80. We never received any money. She probably thinks she sent it, but..." A pitying shake of the head. It's sad, watching them decline. Jordan wanted to believe her mother was lying. But the alternative that her grandmother was experiencing cognitive decline seemed more plausible than her parents stealing $20,000 from their own daughter. She never brought it up again. The doubt, though, never fully disappeared. Set up for later revelation, Jordan did question it, but was gaslit. D. The letters that never arrived, foreshadowing the evidence box. When Jordan was young, she wrote letters to her grandparents constantly. Detailed letters about school, friends, dreams, fears. She gave them to her mother to mail. Stamps were expensive, and the mailbox was at the end of a long driveway. Thumbnail text. Years later, during that same phone call about the money, Eleanor said something else that lingered. "I always wished you'd written more when you were young. We treasured the few letters that reached us." Few letters. Jordan had written dozens, maybe 100. "I did write," Jordan said. "All the time." A long pause. "That's strange. We only received perhaps 10 over all those years?" Jordan mentioned it to her mother. The explanation was instant. "The Postal Service loses things constantly. You know how unreliable they are." But Jordan had started to notice a pattern. Every strange gap in her relationship with her grandparents had an explanation from her mother. Every explanation was just plausible enough to accept. And accepting was always easier than fighting. E. Present day. The suspicious invitation. 15 years after college, Jordan had built a life entirely her own. Financial analyst at a respected Philadelphia firm, an apartment she'd furnished with her own money, a career she'd earned through competence, not connections. She'd proven to herself, if no one else, that she didn't need her family to succeed. She visited her parents perhaps twice a year, holidays, obligatory appearances. Each visit reminded her why she stayed away. So when her mother called with unusual warmth, Jordan's instincts flickered. "We're having a family dinner Saturday, just us. Your grandparents mentioned wanting everyone together soon, and we thought this would be perfect." Something felt wrong. Her parents never voluntarily included her. And if her grandparents wanted a gathering, why hadn't they called her directly? "I'll be there," Jordan said. She told herself it might be different this time, that people could change, that families could heal. She was wrong about all of it. Cliffhanger. I didn't know that dinner would be the last time I'd ever sit at my parents' table as their daughter. And I didn't know that my mother, the woman who always seemed so fragile, so tearful, so helpless, had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. Part 2. Rising Action. The Dinner and the Lies. Objective. Escalate conflict to breaking point. Reveal twist Hasson, parents lying about grandparents' wishes. Establish Robert as the visible aggressor while concealing Diane's role. Show Jordan's strategic thinking under pressure. A. The stage dinner. Something is wrong. The Francis family dining room had never looked so elegant. Candles flickered on the polished table. The good china reserved for impressing guests gleamed under the chandelier. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase that Jordan had never seen used. Her mother embraced her at the door with warmth that felt rehearsed. Megan smiled and complimented her dress. Her father poured wine without being asked. Jordan catalogued every detail. This much effort meant they wanted something. The grandparents' chairs remained empty. "Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" Jordan asked. "I thought they wanted this dinner." "They couldn't make it," her mother said smoothly. "Some health concerns. But they send their love. They wanted us to have this conversation as a family first." The first lie. Jordan noted it, but said nothing. Dinner proceeded with aggressive normalcy. Weather discussions, work updates. Her father asked about her job, with an interest he'd never shown before. Her mother refilled her wine glass twice without being asked. When dessert was cleared, the performance ended. Her father reached into a leather briefcase beside his chair and placed a document on the table. "Jordan," he said, "we need to discuss the family's future. At a family dinner, my parents tried to force me to sign my inheritance over to their favorite daughter. When I refused, my dad slapped me and burned my diploma. But they had no idea my grandparents had a surprising twist in store. B. The document and the demand." The papers were titled Family Harmony Agreement. Even the name was a manipulation. Jordan read carefully. Her years analysing financial documents had taught her to find what wasn't being said. The content was simple. Jordan would voluntarily relinquish any claims to her grandparents' estate. All property, investments, and business interests would pass to her parents and sister. In exchange, Jordan would receive the family's gratitude and continued relationship. She almost laughed. They were offering her nothing in exchange for everything. "Your grandparents think this is fair," her mother said, voice soft and reasonable. "You're already so successful, Jordan. You've proven you don't need help. But Megan is still finding her path. And your father has managed Grandpa's company for 15 years. It only makes sense that it stays in his hands." "If Grandma and Grandpa want this," Jordan said, keeping her voice neutral, "why aren't they here? Why didn't they ask me themselves?" Her mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "They didn't want to pressure you. They thought it would be easier coming from family." "You are not my family's spokesperson," Jordan said, "and this document has no legal standing. You can't waive inheritance rights to assets belonging to living people." Silence. Her father's face reddened. Her mother's mask flickered. "We consulted a lawyer," her father said tightly. "Then you should ask for a refund." See Jordan's calculated response. Jordan could have exploded, could have accused them of fraud, manipulation, 20 years of theft and lies. Instead, she stayed calm. Her mind was already working 3 steps ahead. "I'm not signing anything tonight," she said. "If Grandma and Grandpa truly want to discuss their estate plans with me, I'll hear it from them directly, not through intermediaries." She stood, picked up the document and held it openly. "I'm keeping this, for my records." "Put that down," her father snapped. "No." Jordan met his eyes steadily. "You presented it to me. It's mine now." She photographed each page with her phone, making no effort to hide what she was doing. Let them see, let them know she was documenting everything. Jordan, her mother said, tears beginning to form. Why are you making this so difficult? We're trying to keep the family together. Why do you always have to be so combative? I'm not being combative, Mom. I'm being careful. There's a difference. D. Megan reveals her true position, set up for twist #2. Megan had been silent throughout dinner, scrolling her phone under the table, performing disinterest. Now she looked up, and her face held something Jordan had never seen before, naked resentment. Just sign it, Jordan. God, you always have to make everything about you. About me? You got the scholarships. You got to be the smart one. You got Grandma's attention every time she visited. You got to leave and build your perfect little life while I stayed here dealing with them. She gestured at their parents. The least you can do is let me have something. Jordan studied her sister, 31 years old, no stable career, no independent income. Still living in an apartment their parents subsidized. Megan wasn't lazy. She'd never been taught that effort was necessary. She'd been crippled by kindness, disabled by indulgence. But there was something else in Megan's voice. Desperation. Fear. What are you afraid of, Megan? Jordan asked quietly. What happens to you if you don't get this money? Par un exposition. The daughter who learned to disappear. Objective. Establish the foundation of injustice while planting seeds for all twists. Create 3 misdirections so audience doesn't predict the ending. Build emotional connection through relatable childhood memories. Megan's face crumpled. I'm 31 and I have nothing. Nothing. Do you understand what that feels like? Yes, Jordan said. I do. I felt it at 18 when I realized no one was going to help me. The difference is, I did something about it. E. Violence erupts. The point of no return. Minor climax. That's enough. Her father stood so quickly his chair crashed backward. You will not come into this house and disrespect your family. You will not speak to your sister that way. And you will sign this document. No. The slap came faster than Jordan expected. Her father's hand connected with her cheek, snapping her head sideways. The shock was almost worse than the pain in 35 years. He'd never hit her. Robert! Her mother's voice held warning, not horror. Not stop, just careful. Jordan touched her burning cheek. Her father was breathing heavily, fists clenched, looking at her with something close to hatred. You think you're so much better than us, he snarled. You with your fancy job and your Penn State degree. You think you're like him, don't you? Like my father. Looking down at everyone. And suddenly Jordan understood something she'd never grasped before. Her father didn't just resent her. He was threatened by her. She reminded him of the father who'd always made him feel small. I'm leaving, Jordan said quietly. You're not going anywhere until... I'm leaving, and you're not going to stop me. She walked toward the door. Behind her she heard her father moving, heard something being ripped from the wall. She turned to see him holding her framed diploma, the one her mother had insisted on displaying after graduation, the one proof of Jordan's achievement that they'd ever acknowledged. He'd never wanted it there. Now she understood why. Her father threw the frame into the lit fireplace. This is what your independence is worth. This is what you are without this family. Nothing. Jordan watched her diploma burn. The frame cracked. The paper curled and blackened. 4 years of overnight shifts. Thousands of hours of exhaustion and determination. Reduced to ash. Her mother sat perfectly still, watching. And on her face, just for a moment, Jordan saw satisfaction. Not horror, not shock, satisfaction. Thank you, Jordan said quietly. Both of you, for finally showing me exactly who you are. She walked out the door. No one followed. Cliffhanger. I didn't drive to my apartment that night. I drove to Lancaster County, to the only people who had ever made me feel seen. I didn't know yet that my grandparents had been waiting for this moment, that they had evidence I couldn't imagine, that my mother's careful 20-year conspiracy was about to unravel completely. Part 3. Climax. Major climax. The box and the truth. Objective. Confirm twist #1, grandparents never knew about dinner. Reveal twist #2, the forged letter and Diane's orchestration. Reveal twist #3, the evidence box. Transform Jordan from victim to active, participant in justice. A. The drive to Lancaster County. The highway was empty at this hour. Jordan drove with her hands steady on the wheel, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. The document, the lies, Megan's desperation. Her father's violence, her mother's satisfied smile. That smile, Jordan couldn't stop seeing it. For 35 years, she'd believed her mother was weak, a fragile woman dominated by a controlling husband, too passive to protect her eldest daughter. That smile told a different story. She arrived at her grandparents' farmhouse just before 10. Lights were still on in the living room. When she pulled into the driveway, the front door opened before she could knock. Grandpa Richard stood silhouetted in the doorway. 81 years old, slightly stooped now, but with the same sharp eyes that had built a construction company from nothing. Jordan, his voice was unsurprised. Come in, your grandmother's been worried all evening. The family that taught her silence. Jordan Francis learned early that love in the Francis household was a limited resource and none of it was allocated to her. She was the firstborn, but that title came with obligations rather than privileges. Her role was to understand, to yield, to make herself small so others could take up space. The first truth confirmed. Eleanor was waiting in the living room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw Jordan's face, the red mark still visible on her cheek, her expression hardened. What happened? Jordan told them everything. The dinner, the document, the claim that grandparents wanted her to sign away her inheritance, the slap, the burning diploma. When she mentioned that her parents claimed this was the grandparents' wish, both Richard and Eleanor went very still. Jordan, Eleanor said carefully, we didn't know about any dinner tonight. Your parents told us they were visiting friends in New Jersey. We specifically asked if you would be there, and your mother said you were too busy with work. The lie confirmed. Her parents had orchestrated everything. We would never ask you to give up anything, Richard said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Never. You've earned everything you have. We've watched you earn it. Then why? Jordan's voice cracked. Why did it always feel like you didn't care? The visits that never happened. The calls that were always cut short. The money you sent that I never received. What money you never received? The room went silent. 20 years of theft revealed. Jordan explained what she'd discovered years ago, Eleanor's mention of sending $5,000 annually, the confrontation with her mother, the gaslighting about Eleanor's confusion. Eleanor's face drained of colour. Jordan, I sent that money every year for 4 years. Bank transfers to your parents' account with explicit written instructions that it was for your education expenses. I worked 2 jobs through college, Jordan said quietly. I never saw $1 of it. Richard stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. He returned with a folder old worn, filled with papers. We keep records of everything, he said. Bank transfer receipts, written confirmations, every payment documented. He spread the papers on the coffee table. $20,000 sent, received by her parents, never delivered. We thought we were helping you, Eleanor whispered, all those years. We thought we were making it easier. You tried, Jordan said. They intercepted it. D, the wooden box, evidence of a lifetime, twist #3. Eleanor rose slowly, steadying herself on the arm of her chair. She walked to an antique chest near the window and retrieved a wooden box, the kind meant to hold precious things. I've kept this for over 20 years, she said, waiting for the right moment. I think that moment is now. Inside the box, Eleanor's diary, leather-bound, filled with dated entries spanning decades. Each entry documented something she'd witnessed. The cancelled birthday parties, the dismissive comments, the way Diane's eyes would harden whenever Jordan entered the room. I knew something was wrong when Jordan was very young, Eleanor said. I confronted Diane when Jordan was 12. She threatened to cut us off completely if I interfered again. For 2 years we weren't allowed to see either grandchild. I learned that direct confrontation only hurt Jordan more, so I started documenting instead. Jordan's childhood letters, a heartbreaking collection. Perhaps a dozen letters, some yellowed with age, some clearly recovered later. These are the ones that reached us, Eleanor explained. You wrote constantly, didn't you? We received almost nothing. I knew your mother was intercepting them, but I couldn't prove it until. Her younger sister Megan arrived 4 years later into a completely different family. Where Jordan received expectations, Megan received celebration. Where Jordan earned tolerance, Megan earned adoration. Jordan spent years trying to understand the difference. She never found an answer that didn't hurt. The recovered letters a larger stack. When we hired the investigator 2 years ago, we asked him to look into everything. He found these in your parents' storage unit. Your mother kept them. All of them. I don't know why, maybe as trophies, maybe she forgot they were there. But she kept every letter you wrote us and never sent. Jordan held her own childhood handwriting. Letters about school, about friends, about wishing she could visit Grandma and Grandpa more often. A letter from age 9 asking if she'd done something wrong because her parents said grandparents were too busy to see her. "I thought you didn't want me," Jordan whispered. "We always wanted you," Eleanor said. "We just couldn't reach you." E. The forged letter. The final betrayal. Twist #2. Richard handed Jordan one final document. A letter dated 2 years ago, supposedly written by Jordan herself. "Dear Grandma and Grandpa, I want you to know that I don't need your financial help anymore. I'm doing well on my own. Please redirect any support you planned for me to Megan. Instead, she needs it more than I do. I know you've always wanted to help her, and I think that's the right choice. Love, Jordan." Jordan stared at the words she never wrote. "This isn't my handwriting," she said. "We know," Richard replied. "That's why we hired the investigator. You always had a distinctive slant, a particular way of forming your letters. This was clearly someone had studied your handwriting, but not quite right." "The investigator couldn't access your sister's private communications legally," Eleanor added, "but he could analyze documents. Handwriting experts confirmed this letter was written by someone attempting to forge your style. And when we compared it to birthday cards Megan had sent us over the years." "Megan wrote this?" "The handwriting analysis is conclusive, and we believe she was instructed to do so." "By who?" Eleanor and Richard exchanged a look. 2 years ago," Richard said slowly, "we mentioned to your parents that we were updating our estate plans. We wanted to ensure you were provided for appropriately. Your mother's reaction was extreme. She called every day for weeks, suggesting we reconsider, warning us that you were too independent and wouldn't appreciate it. Then this letter arrived." "Your mother has been the architect of this," Eleanor said quietly. "Your father goes along with her, he always has. But Diane has been planning this for a very long time. F. Jordan takes control. The revelations could have destroyed Jordan. Instead, they clarified everything. 35 years of confusion. 35 years of wondering what she'd done wrong, why her mother couldn't love her, why she always felt like a stranger in her own family. None of it was her fault. None of it was ever her fault. "What do you want to do?" she asked her grandparents. Richard explained their estate plan. 2 years ago, after discovering the forged letter, they had restructured everything through a revocable living trust. Jordan was the primary beneficiary, 70% of all assets, including majority ownership of Francis Construction. Her parents would receive 15%, held in a restricted trust with conditions. Megan would receive 15%, also conditional. But they had waited for proof, waited for the right moment. "Tonight was the proof," Jordan said. "Yes." Your mother finally overplayed her hand. Jordan thought carefully about what she wanted. Not revenge. Revenge was her father's language, her mother's currency. Justice. Accountability. Documentation that she wasn't crazy, that she hadn't imagined the injustice, that her family had systematically wronged her. What Jordan didn't know, her mother Diane had been 21 and terrified when she discovered she was pregnant. The hasty wedding, the abandoned pre-law dreams. The life she never chose, Diane blamed all of it on the baby she was forced to have. Jordan wasn't a daughter to Diane. She was evidence of a derailed future. When Megan was born, planned, wanted, celebrated, Diane finally had the child she'd chosen. The difference in treatment wasn't unconscious. It was compensation. "I want consequences they can't escape," Jordan said finally. "I want it done legally, cleanly, in a way they can't fight. And I want them to understand exactly why it's happening." "Then let's make sure of that," Richard said. Together they reviewed the trust documents. Jordan suggested additions, a no-contest clause that would void any inheritance if challenged. A requirement that all communication with Jordan go through attorneys. Specific conditions for Megan that might force her to actually grow. She wasn't just receiving justice, she was helping design it. Cliffhanger. 1 week later, I sat in Mr. Harrison's law office, watching my parents walk through the door with confident smiles. My father wore his best suit. My mother had pearls at her throat. They had no idea that everything they'd built on lies was about to collapse. And they had no idea that I finally knew who the real architect of my suffering was. Part 4. Falling Action. Second Climax. The Family Tribunal. Objective. Deliver emotional payoff through systematic revelation of truth. Expose Diane as the mastermind. Show proportional, legal, satisfying consequences for all antagonists. A. The formal gathering. The conference room at Harrison and Associates was designed for serious business. Mahogany table, leather chairs, walls lined with legal volumes accumulated over decades. Mr. Harrison, the Francis family attorney for over 20 years, sat at the head of the table with a folder thick enough to suggest this would not be a simple meeting. Present. Richard and Eleanor, composed and patient. Jordan, wearing her great-grandmother's necklace. Robert and Diane, dressed as if for church, projecting respectability. Megan, fidgeting with her phone, avoiding everyone's eyes. Robert had arrived with the confidence of a man expecting validation. He'd managed his parents' company for 15 years. He assumed this meeting would formalize his eventual inheritance, perhaps with some adjustments to accommodate Jordan's difficult behavior. Diane smiled at Jordan with practiced warmth. I'm glad we could resolve our little disagreement as a family. That's what matters most, isn't it? Family unity. Jordan said nothing. She'd learned that silence could be devastating. B. The Living Trust announcement. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Richard and Eleanor Francis have asked me to facilitate the formal announcement of their living trust distribution. I want to be clear, this is not a reading of a will. Your parents are very much alive and have chosen to execute an immediate restructuring of their assets. Robert nodded approvingly. Very sensible. Get everything organised while you're still able. The distribution is as follows, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice carefully neutral. To Jordan Francis, 70% of all assets, including majority ownership of Francis Construction, the family residence at 847 Maple Drive, and all associated investment accounts. The silence was absolute. Robert's confident smile froze. Diane's face went pale. Megan's phone clattered to the table. To Robert and Diane Francis, 15% of assets, held in a restricted trust with annual disbursements, subject to behavioural conditions. Robert is removed from his position as operational manager of Francis Construction, effective immediately. Additionally, Robert and Diane will vacate the residence at 847 Maple Drive within 90 days, as ownership transfers to Jordan. Robert's chair scraped backward as he half rose. This is ABSURD. Dad, Mom, this has to be a mistake. B. The 16th birthday that disappeared, foreshadowing grandparents plus misdirection Hasson. Jordan's sweet 16 was supposed to matter. Her parents promised a party. They let her invite friends, choose decorations, pick a cake. For one brief moment, Jordan allowed herself to hope. The morning of her birthday, Megan developed a stomachache. Within an hour, everything was cancelled. Your sister needs us, her mother said. You're old enough to understand. Sit down, Robert, Richard said. We're not finished. To Megan Francis, 15% of assets, held in trust with release conditions including 2 consecutive years of employment and completion of a certified financial education program. Failure to meet these conditions within 5 years will result in forfeiture of her share to designated charitable organisations. Megan looked up, stunned. I have to get a job? Among other things, Mr. Harrison confirmed. C. The evidence presented, emotional climax. Diane recovered first. She always did. This is cruel, she said, tears welling in her eyes. After everything Robert and I have done for this family, we dedicated our lives to those children, to your company, to maintaining family bonds. And now Jordan has manipulated you into... Mrs. Francis, Mr. Harrison interrupted, perhaps you should review the documentation before making accusations about manipulation. He opened his folder and spread documents across the table. Bank transfer records from 20 years of payments, $5,000 annually, clearly marked for Jordan's education expenses, traced to accounts controlled by Robert and Diane. Written instructions accompanying each transfer, specifying the money was for Jordan. The forged letter, with professional handwriting analysis confirming it was not written by Jordan. A comparative analysis showing the forgery matched Megan's handwriting. Eleanor's dated diary entries documenting decades of witnessed favoritism. Jordan's recovered childhood letters found in a storage unit rented by the Francis family. These records, Mr. Harrison said, demonstrate a pattern of financial misappropriation, fraud, and systematic interference with family relationships spanning over 2 decades. Robert grabbed the bank transfer records, scanning them frantically. We used that money for household expenses. The girls benefited. The money was specifically designated for Jordan's education, Richard said. We have your written acknowledgements confirming receipt. Jordan worked 2 jobs through college while you redirected our support to Megan. There's no ambiguity here, Robert. D. The mastermind exposed. Misdirection #3 destroyed. Diane switched tactics. The tears dried. Her voice hardened. This is entrapment. You set us up. That dinner last week, you knew what would happen. You wanted Robert to lose his temper so you'd have an excuse. We didn't know about the dinner, Eleanor interrupted. You told us you were visiting friends. You lied to us, Diane, just like you've been lying for 35 years. I have never. Stop. Robert's voice cracked. He was staring at the document specifically, at the text analysis comparing the forged letter to known samples of Megan's handwriting. Diane, the letter, Megan wrote. But you told me Jordan sent it. You told me she wanted to be cut out. The room went still. You told me, Robert repeated, his voice rising. You said Jordan didn't want anything from them. You said she'd written to them herself. You said, Robert, don't be dramatic. Did you make her write it? Did you tell our daughter to forge a letter from her own sister? Megan started crying. Mom said it would help the family. She said Jordan didn't care about the money anyway. She said, I did what was necessary for this family, Diane snapped, all pretense dropping. For OUR family. Jordan was never really part of it. She was a mistake. Do you understand? I was 21 years old. I had a future. I was going to be a lawyer. And then she happened. And everything I wanted disappeared. The confession hung in the air like smoke. And then she had the nerve to be smart, Diane continued, decades of resentment pouring out, to be successful, to make Megan look bad just by existing. Everything I did was to protect my real daughter from being overshadowed by an accident I never wanted. Jordan felt something shift inside her. Not pain, she was past that now. Just clarity. She'd spent 35 years wondering what she'd done wrong. Now she knew her crime was being born. Jordan understood perfectly. She just wished understanding didn't hurt so much. She spent her 16th birthday alone in her room, listening to her parents fuss over Megan's miraculous recovery downstairs. Then the doorbell rang. Grandpa Richard and Grandma Eleanor stood on the porch holding a small cake and a wrapped gift. They'd driven 90 minutes from Lancaster County without being invited. We couldn't miss this, Eleanor said simply. Thank you, Mom, Jordan said quietly, for finally telling the truth. E. Jordan's prepared response. Jordan stood, drawing every eye in the room. Mr. Harrison, I should clarify some additional facts. I photographed the documents my parents attempted to force me to sign last week. I also have a visible injury from my father's assault, which I documented with photographs and a medical examination. I'm prepared to file a police report regarding both the assault and the forgery if anyone chooses to contest these arrangements. Robert went pale. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. Additionally, Jordan continued, the trust includes a no contest clause. If any party attempts to legally challenge this distribution, they forfeit their share entirely. The evidence of fraud and forgery is sufficient for criminal referral if necessary. I'm hoping that won't be necessary. She looked at her father. You burned my diploma thinking it would break me, but that diploma was just paper. The education is still in my head. The work ethic is still in my bones. You can't burn those. She looked at her mother. You spent 35 years trying to erase me because I reminded you of choices you regret. I'm sorry you never got to be a lawyer, Mom, but that wasn't my fault. I was a baby. I didn't choose to be born. You chose to blame me instead of building something anyway. She looked at Megan. You had every advantage, every opportunity handed to you, and you chose to forge a letter to steal from me. I hope your 15% is worth what it cost you. And I hope the conditions attached to it teach you something no one else ever bothered to teach you how to stand on your own. F, the grandparents' final words. Eleanor rose slowly, supporting herself on the table. We've watched you try to erase Jordan for 35 years. We documented what we could. We waited because direct confrontation only made things worse. Diane, you made sure of that when Jordan was 12. But we never stopped paying attention. We never stopped keeping records. And we never stopped loving our granddaughter. Richard's voice was heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Robert, you could have been different. You could have protected both your daughters. Instead, you let your wife run a 20-year campaign against your own child because you were too weak to stand up to her and because Jordan reminded you of everything you're not. That's your burden to carry. We can't fix it for you. The meeting ended in silence. Robert and Diane left without a word. Robert stunned, Diane rigid with fury. At the door, Diane turned back one final time. You'll regret this, Jordan. All of you will regret this. No, Mom, Jordan said. For the first time in my life, I have nothing to regret. G legal consequences. Added section. The criminal process unfolded over the following months. Jordan filed a police report documenting the assault and presenting evidence of the forgery. The district attorney's office, faced with clear documentation and professional analysis, moved forward with charges. Diane pleaded no contest to fraud by misrepresentation. Her sentence: 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of the misappropriated $20,000. The judge noted that her age and lack of prior criminal record influenced the sentencing, but the conviction would remain on her record permanently.